Let's keep in mind that Joseph, of all the brothers, of all the tribes, was the one least in contact with the rest of the family. Somewhat isolated, descended to Egypt, considered the least moral of all the countries in that region. And we have already found that Yaakov was reassured that in spite of Joseph's immersion in the Egyptian culture and in spite of his temporal success and his ascent to power, that he remains the same righteous Joseph that he was. And yet, at the same time, as per Rashi's explanation, that as he prepares to bless them, he senses the removal of his Holy Spirit. It was not unusual for him to think, perhaps, that the unworthiness of the two sons, as he perceived it, was perhaps connected to the union of Joseph and his wife in some way or another. Keep in mind, again, Joseph was elevated to the post of vice monarch, and it says that Pharaoh gave him as a wife Asnas bas Potiphera, ironically the daughter of the woman who tried unsuccessfully to seduce Joseph, leading to his imprisonment. So this was not someone, it would seem, that Joseph chose. And we know the enormous care that was put into the shidduchim, the matches that were made by the forefathers, how Abraham sent Eliezer to find a match for Isaac, how Yaakov was sent to Haran to seek his cousin Rachel, and how much divine providence was involved. And here is Joseph in Egypt, and indeed, who should he marry? It is not likely that he can follow the example of Isaac and Jacob and marry someone from his own extended family, which at that time was something like this endogamous marriage, because it was within the family of the patriarchs that one could be assured about the belief in one God. And the nature of Jacob's fear is understood in commentaries in one of two ways. One is that Yosef is a tzaddik, but perhaps the wife that he took from this immoral Egyptian society, not from the family of the patriarchs, was not suitable. And indeed, what is referred to in the commentaries as a giur, a kind of a conversion which Yaakov feared may not have taken place. The expression as used by the patriarchs and members of the 12 tribes before the Exodus has a slightly different nuance. It's not the classical sense of accepting all the commandments per se. Generally, it means making that transition from one of the pagan nations and adopting the monotheistic beliefs of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so the concern is that perhaps this was not the case regarding the wife of Joseph. How does Joseph reassure him? By showing him a proof that a act of marriage, which we now call kiddushin, which comes from the word kadosh, sanctity, took place. Why is that a reassurance? Because in terms of the period following the giving of the Torah, kiddushin can only happen when both people are Jewish. That's a very important principle, a very sensitive one, of course. because this very special transcendent process called Kiddushin, it's not merely a question, as many people understand it, as to the permissibility of a Jew and a non-Jew marrying, but rather this special status indeed doesn't happen, this Kiddushin, this sanctified nature of the relationship, unless they are both Jewish. So, in a parallel sense, by showing Yaakov that an act of marriage took place, not merely a cohabitation, he is saying, by definition, that his partner is someone who has a commonality with him. Someone who made this transition to the faith in one God. Otherwise, it would not be possible to speak about an act of betrothal. This is somewhat problematic because had there been some kind of spiritual deficiency in the sons of Joseph due to this kind of lack or taint in their mother not being a suitable match for Joseph, this also seems like something Yaakov would have perceived previously. So, by the force of this question, another interpretation is given, which is that Yaakov was not worried about the character or the faith of the wife of Joseph, but even a woman who is suitable and has a proper faith. It was not always the case that an act of marriage took place between a man and a woman. We find even by Abraham that he had what is called pilakshim, which means concubines. And so, according to this explanation, Yaakov surmised that perhaps the relationship between Yosef and his wife, as the parents of these two men, Manasseh and Ephraim, was not one of matrimony, but perhaps was one of her being a concubine, which could be looked at as a lesser status and a less exalted background, and hence that could perhaps explain the unworthiness of them to receive this blessing. And hence the answer of Yosef would be, look, here is the ketubah. And Rashi already explained when the word pilegesh, concubine, first appears in the portion of Chayesara. He explains that a wife gets a ketubah and a concubine does not. So according to this explanation, showing Yaakov the ketubah is his way of assuring Yaakov, no, Asnat, his wife, is not a concubine. We are properly married. And here the Rebbe asks a different question, however. Indeed, this discussion is based on a talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In that case, showing the ketubah would be sufficient. What is this marriage contract, this shtar erusin, that Rashi speaks about exactly, and why is it necessary?